In 2010, Ferraris started catching fire. Not on racetracks pushing limits, not from high-speed crashes, but while parked in driveways and sitting in traffic. Luxury dealerships received panicked calls. Social media exploded with images of charred Italian metal. And Ferrari, one of the most prestigious automotive brands on the planet, faced a crisis that threatened to destroy decades of carefully cultivated reputation. The car at the center of this chaos was the 458 Italia, a machine that automotive journalists had called perfect, a vehicle that represented everything Ferrari stood for: speed, beauty, and uncompromising Italian craftsmanship. Yet here it was, burning to the ground in parking lots across the world. What makes this story fascinating isn't just the fires. It's everything that came before and after. The 458 Italia has lived multiple lives since its debut in 2009. It's been the dream car of enthusiasts, the weapon of choice for street racers, the target of sophisticated counterfeiters, and now, increasingly, a collector's item commanding prices that would have seemed insane just 5 years ago. This is a car wrapped in contradiction. Praised as one of the greatest Ferraris ever built while simultaneously generating more controversy than almost any vehicle in the company's modern history. Celebrity owners have crashed them spectacularly. Insurance fraudsters have targeted them specifically. Underground racing scenes adopted them as status symbols. And through it all, the 458 Italia has somehow emerged with its reputation not just intact, but elevated. There's a reason why serious collectors now view this car differently than they did when it was in production. There's a reason why values have started climbing instead of falling. And there's a reason why Ferrari themselves consider the 458 the end of something that can never be replicated. But to understand why this car became so controversial, we need to go back to where it all began. The early 2000s were complicated times at Ferrari's Maranello headquarters. The F430 had been a commercial success, but internally, engineers knew they were approaching a crossroads. Emissions regulations were tightening, competitors were catching up, and there was growing pressure to decide whether Ferrari's mid-engine V8 cars would follow the industry trend toward turbocharged engines or remain committed to naturally aspirated power. The decision to create what would become the 458 Italia wasn't just about building another sports car. It was about making a statement. Ferrari's leadership understood that whatever came next might be the last of its kind, the final naturally aspirated V8, before regulatory pressures forced a fundamental change in how these engines were built. Development began in secrecy during 2007. The project carried internal designation F142, and from the start, it was clear this wouldn't be a simple evolution of the F430. Ferrari wanted a complete reimagining. They wanted a car that would silence critics who claimed the company had become complacent, that the legendary Italian marque was coasting on reputation rather than innovation. Pininfarina, the legendary design house that had shaped Ferrari's aesthetic identity for decades, was brought in for what would become one of their final major collaborations with the brand. The relationship between Ferrari and Pininfarina stretched back to 1952, but by the late 2000s, things were changing. Ferrari was developing more internal design capability, and the dynamics of their partnership were shifting. What emerged from Pininfarina Studios was radical. The 458 Italia abandoned the aggressive angles of the F430 for something more organic, more flowing. Every surface served an aerodynamic purpose. The front nose featured deformable winglets that adjusted at speed. The rear diffuser was the most aggressive Ferrari had ever fitted to a road car. Air intakes were integrated into the bodywork in ways that seemed to merge function and form seamlessly. But it wasn't just about looks. The development team faced intense pressure to deliver performance numbers that would embarrass competitors. The target was clear: this car needed to be faster than anything in its class while remaining usable as a daily driver for wealthy customers who expected Ferrari levels of comfort alongside blistering speed. Testing took place across multiple continents under extreme secrecy. Prototype vehicles wore heavy camouflage. Test drivers signed strict confidentiality agreements. Ferrari was paranoid about leaks, knowing that automotive media would go into frenzy mode the moment any details emerged. The internal debates were intense. Engine displacement, transmission type, suspension geometry, every decision was fought over by engineers who understood they were creating something that would define Ferrari's reputation for years. Some wanted to push boundaries even further. Others worried about reliability and the practical challenges of servicing vehicles sold to customers worldwide. When the wraps finally came off at the 2009 Frankfurt Motor Show, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Automotive journalists who had grown cynical about manufacturer launches described feeling genuine excitement. The 458 Italia looked like nothing else on the road. It promised performance that seemed almost impossible for a street-legal vehicle. Ferrari announced a starting price of around $230,000, serious money, but within reach for the brand's established customer base. Order books opened immediately, and deposits flooded in from buyers who hadn't even seen the car in person. The design was stunning, but what was happening under that sculpted bodywork would change everything. The heart of the 458 Italia was a 4.5-liter V8 that produced 562 horsepower, figures that seem almost quaint by today's standards but represented something remarkable for a naturally aspirated engine in 2009. More importantly, this engine would rev to a screaming 9,000 revolutions per minute, producing a sound that engineers had spent 2 years perfecting. That sound wasn't accidental. Ferrari employed acoustic engineers who worked alongside the powertrain team, treating the exhaust note as seriously as any performance metric. They analyzed frequency responses, harmonics, and the emotional impact of different sound profiles. The goal wasn't just to make the car loud, it was to create a specific emotional response in both drivers and bystanders. The flat-plane crankshaft configuration gave the V8 its distinctive wail, different from the rumble of American muscle cars or the refined purr of German competitors. When you press the accelerator in a 458, the sound built progressively, reaching a crescendo at high RPM that reviewers consistently described as intoxicating. This wasn't marketing speak. It was the result of obsessive engineering focused on creating sensory experiences. Michael Schumacher's involvement in development went far beyond typical celebrity endorsement. The 7-time Formula One world champion was under contract with Ferrari during the 458's creation, and he provided extensive input during testing phases. Schumacher drove prototype vehicles at Fiorano, Ferrari's private test track, offering feedback on everything from steering response to brake feel. His influence showed most clearly in the steering wheel design. The 458 featured a Formula One-inspired steering wheel with integrated controls that eliminated the need for traditional stalks. Turn signals, headlights, and windshield wipers were all controlled through buttons mounted on the wheel itself. This allowed drivers to keep their hands in position at all times, mimicking the experience Schumacher knew from racing. The transmission represented another breakthrough. Ferrari's dual-clutch 7-speed gearbox could swap gears in just 40 milliseconds, faster than any human could possibly react. In automatic mode, it predicted driver intentions based on throttle inputs and adjusted shift patterns accordingly. In manual mode using the paddle shifters, it responded with violence that shocked drivers used to conventional automatics. Suspension geometry drew directly from Ferrari's racing program. The system used magnetorheological dampers that could adjust firmness thousands of times per second based on road conditions. Sensors throughout the chassis fed data to computers that made micro-adjustments continuously, keeping the car stable through corners while remaining comfortable during highway cruising. The carbon ceramic brakes were developed with technology transferred from Ferrari's Formula One efforts. They could withstand temperatures that would destroy conventional steel rotors, providing consistent stopping power even during aggressive track sessions. The brake-by-wire system eliminated traditional mechanical connections between pedal and calipers, allowing computer mediation that prevented lockups while maximizing stopping force. Perhaps most impressive was the aerodynamic package. At 124 miles per hour, the 458 generated 308 pounds of downforce, enough to meaningfully affect handling characteristics without requiring ugly wings or spoilers that would compromise the car's elegant appearance. The entire underbody was sculpted to manage airflow, and the rear diffuser created a low-pressure zone that essentially sucked the car toward the pavement. Ferrari's testing program covered over 180,000 miles across various conditions before the first customer vehicles were delivered. Engineers drove through Italian summers and Finnish winters, desert heat and mountain cold. They wanted to ensure the car could handle anything owners might throw at it. The attention to detail extended to seemingly minor components. The fuel tank was repositioned to improve weight distribution. The exhaust manifold was redesigned 16 times before engineers were satisfied. Even the windshield wipers were engineered for minimal noise intrusion at speed. By every objective measure, Ferrari had created something extraordinary. Magazine tests confirmed blistering performance numbers. Professional drivers praised the car's balance and feedback. Wealthy customers who had ordered sight unseen reported satisfaction beyond expectations. Ferrari thought they'd created the perfect machine. Then everything started going up in flames, literally. The first reports trickled in during the summer of 2010. A 458 Italia in California had caught fire while the owner sat in traffic. Then another in Florida. Then Paris. Then Hong Kong. Within weeks, images of burning Ferraris were circulating across automotive forums and social media platforms that were just beginning to dominate public discourse. Ferrari's initial response was cautious. The company issued statements suggesting isolated incidents while launching internal investigations. But the reports kept coming. By August, at least 5 vehicles had experienced fires, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. These weren't high-speed crashes or driver errors. These were vehicles spontaneously combusting during normal operation. The culprit turned out to be embarrassingly mundane. During manufacturing, workers had applied adhesive to components in the rear wheel arch area. This adhesive, when exposed to the heat generated by the engine and exhaust during normal driving, could ignite. The flames would then spread to surrounding components, turning a $250,000 supercar into expensive kindling. On September 1, 2010, Ferrari announced a global recall affecting 1,248 vehicles worldwide. The company stated they would replace the wheel arch components with redesigned parts that didn't use the problematic adhesive. Customers were instructed not to drive their vehicles until repairs were completed. For a brand built on engineering excellence, the recall represented a profound embarrassment. Media coverage was merciless. Headlines questioned whether Ferrari had sacrificed safety for style. Competitors' marketing teams quietly circulated the stories. Social media users created memes showing burning Ferraris alongside the company's famous prancing horse logo. Late-night comedians made jokes about Italian build quality. The celebrity factor amplified everything. When wealthy, famous individuals buy exotic cars, their problems become public spectacles. Reports emerged of well-known figures whose vehicles had experienced issues. While some of these stories were exaggerated or misattributed, the perception took hold that the 458 was dangerous. Ferrari's response eventually proved effective, but not before significant reputation damage occurred. The company moved quickly once the recall was announced, dispatching technicians worldwide and providing loaner vehicles where possible. They covered all repair costs and offered extended warranties to affected customers. More importantly, they were transparent about the cause once it was identified. The fires stopped after the recall. Subsequent 458s produced from late 2010 onward incorporated the redesigned components, and no further incidents occurred. But the episode had exposed vulnerabilities in Ferrari's quality control processes that the company took years to fully address. What made the situation particularly painful for Ferrari was the contrast with the car's performance excellence. Here was a vehicle that could lap racetracks faster than almost anything short of dedicated racing machinery, done in by a simple manufacturing error involving glue. The discord between engineering triumph and production failure became a case study in how even the most sophisticated companies can stumble on basics. Insurance implications rippled through the exotic car market. Premiums for 458 ownership increased substantially in the months following the recall. Some insurers required proof that recall repairs had been completed before providing coverage. The fire risk had introduced an uncertainty that actuaries found difficult to price. Ferrari's long-term response included overhauling internal quality control procedures. The company implemented additional inspection stages during manufacturing and increased supplier oversight. These changes added cost and complexity to production but were deemed necessary to prevent future embarrassments. By 2011, the fire controversy had largely faded from public attention. New 458s were selling briskly, and owners reported no issues with vehicles produced after the recall. But the episode remained a footnote in the car's history, a reminder that even legendary brands could make basic errors with potentially catastrophic consequences. The fires were just the beginning. What happened on the streets would prove even more dangerous. The Ferrari 458 Italia arrived at a particular moment in automotive culture. Social media was making car enthusiasm more visible than ever before. Video platforms were filled with content showing exotic vehicles doing things manufacturers definitely didn't intend. And in major cities worldwide, underground street racing scenes were experiencing a renaissance fueled by wealth, technology, and a desire for experiences that money couldn't officially buy. The 458 quickly became a status symbol within these communities. Its combination of accessible power, dramatic styling, and Ferrari badge made it the perfect machine for individuals who wanted to demonstrate wealth while participating in activities that ranged from legally questionable to outright dangerous. Reports of 458 involvement in street racing incidents accumulated across multiple jurisdictions. In Dubai, where exotic car culture reached extremes, police documented numerous citations involving the model. In Los Angeles, a city with its own complicated relationship with car culture, the 458 became a frequent presence in organized street racing events that shut down highways and surface streets for impromptu competitions. The crashes were inevitable. High-profile incidents generated news coverage that reinforced perceptions of the 458 as a dangerous vehicle in the wrong hands. Celebrity owners made headlines when their vehicles were damaged in circumstances that suggested speed beyond reasonable limits. Social media accounts documented the aftermath of incidents that could easily have ended in tragedy. One pattern that emerged was the involvement of rental companies. Exotic car rental had become a substantial industry, and the 458 was among the most requested vehicles. This put brutally powerful machinery in the hands of individuals who often had no experience managing that kind of performance. Rental companies reported high incident rates with the model, leading some to impose additional restrictions or remove 458s from their fleets entirely. The insurance fraud angle became particularly troubling. Investigators documented cases where owners had allegedly staged accidents or arson to collect on policies. The 458's value made it an attractive target for these schemes. A vehicle worth hundreds of thousands of dollars represented a significant potential payday for someone willing to destroy their own property and file false claims. One particularly audacious case involved a group that investigators alleged was systematically purchasing high-end vehicles, insuring them at maximum values, and then arranging for their destruction. Multiple 458s were reportedly involved before law enforcement disrupted the operation. The case highlighted how exotic cars could become commodities in criminal enterprises unrelated to their intended purpose. The tuning community embraced the 458 despite Ferrari's aggressive opposition to modifications. Underground shops offered everything from exhaust systems that bypassed emissions equipment to full turbo conversions that pushed power well beyond factory specifications. Some of these modifications proved reliable, others resulted in catastrophic engine failures that destroyed vehicles entirely. Ferrari fought back through legal means and technical countermeasures. The company's warranty terms voided coverage for modified vehicles. Technical systems were designed to detect unauthorized alterations and log them permanently in vehicle computers. Some dealerships reportedly refused service to owners whose cars showed evidence of modifications. This created a cat-and-mouse dynamic between Ferrari and the enthusiast community. Shops specializing in undetectable modifications emerged. Online forums shared techniques for defeating factory safeguards. A parallel ecosystem developed around the 458 that existed entirely outside Ferrari's control or approval. The street racing culture associated with the 458 also intersected with social media in complicated ways. Content creators discovered that filming exotic car activities generated substantial viewership. This incentive structure encouraged increasingly risky behavior as creators competed for attention. The 458 appeared in countless videos showing activities that would be illegal in most jurisdictions. Law enforcement responses varied by location. Some jurisdictions implemented crackdown operations specifically targeting exotic car gatherings. Others struggled with resources and jurisdiction issues that made enforcement challenging. The global nature of social media meant that content filmed in lenient jurisdictions could influence behavior worldwide. For Ferrari, the Street Racing Association created brand management challenges. The company cultivated an image of sophisticated European elegance. Owner profiles suggested successful professionals with refined tastes. The reality of 458s being destroyed in illegal street races or crashed by rental customers painted a very different picture. But the real scandal wasn't just about crashes. Something far more sinister was happening behind closed doors. In 2013, Spanish authorities announced they had dismantled an operation producing counterfeit Ferraris and other exotic vehicles. The sophistication of the operation shocked investigators. These weren't crude kit cars built on economy car platforms. They were meticulously constructed replicas designed to fool all but the most knowledgeable experts. The operation had produced vehicles intended to replicate several Ferrari models, but the 458 Italia was among the most popular targets. The counterfeiters obtained body panels from various sources, including salvage vehicles and overseas suppliers. They adapted mechanical components to approximate Ferrari specifications, creating vehicles that looked nearly identical to authentic examples at a fraction of the cost. These fake Ferraris weren't destined for collectors who knew they were buying replicas. According to investigators, the operation intended to sell them as genuine vehicles to unsuspecting buyers. The potential victims would pay authentic Ferrari prices, often well over $200,000, for machines that were fundamentally fraudulent. The legal implications were staggering. Purchasers of these vehicles faced potential total loss of their investment with limited legal recourse against sellers who had likely disappeared. Insurance complications arose because policies covering authentic vehicles wouldn't necessarily apply to counterfeits. And the safety implications were serious. Replica vehicles hadn't been subjected to the crash testing and engineering validation that authentic Ferraris underwent. Ferrari's response was aggressive. The company employed teams of investigators to identify counterfeit operations worldwide. They pursued legal action against replica manufacturers, parts suppliers, and individuals involved in distribution. The brand's legal budget for intellectual property protection reportedly ran into the millions annually. The counterfeit problem extended beyond single operations. Investigators documented networks spanning multiple countries, with components manufactured in Asia, assembly occurring in various locations, and sales targeting wealthy buyers across Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. The 458's popularity made it a particularly attractive target because demand remained strong throughout its production run. Detecting counterfeits required expertise that most buyers didn't possess. Authentic 458s featured specific VIN plate characteristics, unique manufacturing marks, and technical details that differed from replicas. Ferrari maintained databases that could verify vehicle authenticity, but buyers in private party transactions didn't always conduct proper due diligence. The used exotic car market developed protocols in response to counterfeit concerns. Reputable dealers implemented authentication procedures, including checking VINs against Ferrari's records, inspecting specific components known to differ on replicas, and conducting detailed examinations of body panels and chassis structures. These measures added cost and complexity to transactions but provided protection against fraud. Some counterfeits were discovered only after purchase, creating devastating situations for buyers who believed they had acquired authentic vehicles. The financial loss was significant, but emotional impact also affected buyers who had often dreamed of Ferrari ownership for years before finally being able to afford their purchase. The phenomenon reflected broader issues in luxury goods counterfeiting. As wealth concentrated and demand for exclusive items grew, Criminal enterprises developed increasingly sophisticated capabilities to supply that demand through fraudulent means. Ferraris represented the highest-profile automotive targets, but similar issues affected other luxury brands across various product categories. Ferrari implemented authentication programs designed to provide buyers with verification services. These programs involved company representatives examining vehicles and issuing certificates confirming authenticity. While effective, the programs couldn't reach every transaction, and private party sales remained vulnerable to counterfeit infiltration. For the 458 Italia specifically, the counterfeit issue added complexity to the used market. Buyers who might otherwise have purchased privately increasingly preferred dealer transactions where authentication had already occurred. This shifted market dynamics and affected pricing in ways that continued beyond the production period. The Spanish operations disruption represented a significant victory, but investigators acknowledged that counterfeit production continued elsewhere. The economics remained attractive. Authentic 458s commanded prices that provided substantial profit margins for sophisticated counterfeit operations even after production costs were considered. Despite all these problems, something unexpected started happening to the 458's value. By 2018, something unusual was happening in the used Ferrari market. The 458 Italia, which had followed typical depreciation curves after production ended in 2015, started appreciating. Values that had bottomed out began climbing. Collector car analysts noticed the trend and began issuing reports that caught the attention of automotive investors. The cause was relatively simple to identify but had taken time to manifest. The 458 Italia was the last mid-engine Ferrari with a naturally aspirated V8. Its successor, the 488 GTB, used a turbocharged engine that produced more power but fundamentally different character. For enthusiasts who valued the high-revving nature and distinctive sound of naturally aspirated engines, the 458 represented the end of an era. This wasn't just sentiment, it was market mechanics. Ferrari had moved permanently to turbocharging for its V8 models, and regulatory trends suggested they would never return to naturally aspirated engines of this type. The 458 thus occupied a unique historical position, the final expression of an engine philosophy Ferrari had pursued for decades. Collector car markets reward rarity and historical significance. The 458 possessed both. Production numbers were substantial by exotic car standards but limited compared to mass-market vehicles. More importantly, the car's position as a technological endpoint gave it narrative value that transcended pure performance metrics. The Speciale variant commanded particular attention. Ferrari had produced this track-focused version of the 458 with enhanced performance, reduced weight, and more aggressive aerodynamics. Production numbers were lower than the standard model, and the Speciale's enhanced capabilities made it attractive for owners who intended actual track use rather than pure collection purposes. Pricing data told the story clearly. Standard 458 Italia examples that had traded around $150,000 in 2016 were commanding $180,000 or more by 2020. Low-mileage examples with desirable specifications reached well above $200,000. The Speciale variants showed even more dramatic appreciation, with some examples approaching original MSRP despite years of depreciation. The Spider convertible version added another dimension. Some collectors preferred the open-air experience, while others noted that convertibles historically appreciated differently than coupes. Market segmentation developed as different buyer profiles gravitated toward different variants. Color specifications affected values in ways that reflected broader collector car market dynamics. Certain Ferrari paint codes were considered more desirable than others, with traditional colors like Rosso Corsa commanding premiums. Interior configurations also mattered. Some buyers sought specific leather colors or carbon fiber options that Ferrari had offered during the production run. Service history became increasingly important as collector interest grew. Vehicles with complete Ferrari dealer service records traded at premiums over examples with independent service history or gaps in documentation. The factory warranty period had long since expired, but buyers wanted assurance that vehicles had received proper maintenance throughout their lives. The The certification programs Ferrari offered added value for some transactions. Certified pre-owned 458s came with factory backing that provided additional confidence for buyers. However, the certification process involved costs that not all sellers chose to incur, creating market stratification between certified and non-certified examples. Investment analysts who followed collector car markets began including 458 analyses in their reports. Some projected continued appreciation based on historical comparisons to previous end-of-era Ferrari models. Others cautioned that the production numbers were higher than earlier instant classics and that substantial appreciation had already occurred. The global nature of the collector car market meant that 458 values were influenced by international demand. Buyers from regions with emerging wealth, particularly Asia and the Middle East, competed with traditional European and American collectors. This international competition supported prices even when economic conditions weakened in particular markets. Insurance and storage costs complicated the investment thesis. Unlike financial instruments, collector cars required ongoing expenses for proper preservation. Insurance premiums for high-value vehicles were substantial, and climate-controlled storage added additional costs. These carrying costs needed to be factored into any calculation of investment returns. For individuals who viewed the 458 primarily as an investment, the appreciation trend was welcome but created holding dilemmas. Selling captured gains but meant parting with vehicles that might continue appreciating. Holding preserved future upside potential but tied up capital that might be deployed elsewhere. The more interesting group was owners who had purchased 458s to actually drive them. These individuals found themselves in the unusual position of owning vehicles that were worth more than when they had purchased them, despite years of use and accumulated mileage. For some, this created reluctance to drive cars whose value seemed increasingly precious. Market observers noted that the 458's investment performance was part of a broader trend affecting modern collector cars. Vehicles from the 2000s and 2010s that had been dismissed as too new for serious collection were increasingly attracting attention and capital. The 458 was among the most prominent examples, but similar patterns were emerging across various makes and models. So where does this leave the 458 Italia in the grand story of automotive history? The Ferrari 458 Italia occupies an unusual position in automotive history. It was simultaneously one of the most accomplished sports cars of its generation and one of the most controversial. It delivered performance that reset expectations while generating headlines for all the wrong reasons. It attracted wealthy enthusiasts and criminals alike. And now, years after the last example left Ferrari's factory, it has become something its creators probably never anticipated, an investment asset attracting capital from individuals who may never turn a key in one. When automotive historians eventually assess the 458's significance, they will likely focus on its role as a technological endpoint. The naturally aspirated mid-engine V8 Ferrari had been producing variations of this formula for decades. Each generation brought improvements in power, handling, and refinement. The 458 represented the culmination, the furthest that particular engineering philosophy could reasonably be pushed before regulatory and competitive pressures forced a fundamental change. The sound factor cannot be overstated. Modern turbocharged engines produce impressive numbers, but they cannot replicate the visceral, high-frequency scream of a flat-plane crank V8 approaching 9,000 RPM. Enthusiasts who value this experience understand that the 458 offers something increasingly rare, a mechanical symphony that no amount of artificial enhancement can truly recreate. Ferrari themselves have acknowledged the 458's special status in subtle ways. Company communications have referenced the model's historical significance. Development engineers have spoken publicly about the challenges of matching the 458's character with turbocharged successors. There is recognition within Maranello that something was lost when the production line shut down. The controversies that surrounded the 458 during its active years have faded somewhat with time. The fire recall is now historical footnote rather than active scandal. The street racing associations have shifted to newer, flashier machinery. Even the counterfeit concerns have evolved as the replica industry targets more recent models. What remains is the car itself. Thousands of 458 Italia examples continue to exist worldwide, maintained by owners who range from casual enthusiasts to dedicated collectors. Some are driven regularly, accumulating miles and experiences. Others sit in climate-controlled storage, appreciating in value while their tires slowly flat spot. The market's reassessment of the 458 suggests that its reputation has ultimately survived and even been enhanced by the passage of time. Values that once seemed destined for typical supercar depreciation have reversed course. Buyer interest remains strong years after production ended. The car has achieved that rare status where desirability increases rather than decreases with age. For potential buyers today, the 458 Italia presents an interesting proposition. It offers genuinely world-class performance. The car remains capable of humbling far more expensive machinery on appropriate roads or tracks. It provides the emotional experience that naturally aspirated Ferrari ownership has always promised. And it comes with the possibility of value appreciation rather than the certain depreciation that afflicts most vehicles. The risks are also present. These are complex machines requiring expensive maintenance from specialists. Parts costs reflect Ferrari's positioning at the top of the automotive market. The ownership experience demands resources beyond the purchase price itself. Yet something about the 458 Italia continues to resonate with enthusiasts who could choose from countless alternatives. Perhaps it is the sound. Perhaps it is the styling that has aged remarkably well. Perhaps it is the knowledge that nothing quite like it will ever be produced again. The Ferrari 458 Italia was born in controversy, lived through scandal, and has emerged as something approaching a modern classic. Its story encompasses the heights of automotive engineering and the depths of manufacturing error. It has been driven by celebrities and criminals, collected by investors and enthusiasts, and replicated by counterfeiters. Through it all, the car itself remains what it was always intended to be, a remarkably capable machine that delivers experiences impossible to replicate through any other means. In the end, that may be the 458's ultimate legacy. Not the fire headlines or the street racing incidents or the counterfeit scandals. Simply this: Ferrari built something extraordinary, and despite everything that followed, that excellence endured.